Hey, it's Monday. Yeah, that's right. It's Monday, and you know what? It's not. It's Tuesday. Welcome back to Law and Legitimacy. It only feels like Monday because we had yesterday off. It was President's Day. Not that I celebrated any presidency. And Marjorie Taylor Greene wasn't celebrating President's Day yesterday. Mike sends me the following tweet from the good representative from Georgia: impeach Biden or give us a national divorce. We don't pay taxes to fund foreign countries' wars who aren't even NATO allies. We aren't sending our sons and daughters to die for foreign borders and foreign democracy. America is broke. Criminals and cartels reign, and you're a fool. Yo, what up, Marjorie? Come back to us, babe. I mean, I understand that there is a crisis of legitimacy going on in the country and that we're struggling to come up with a common sense of national destiny and that we face and common purpose. And we may or may not be able to do it. But Marjorie Taylor Greene in recent days has all but been calling for civil war. Is she serious? It may be that we're too large a territory with people of too many diverse perspectives to live together in peace and harmony. And it may be that there are forces that are pulling us apart. And it may be that those forces even succeed. I'm open to that possibility, and I'm wide awake to the future and to the present, trying to figure out what happens next. But when it comes time to picking somebody to lead me into the future, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene isn't what I'm looking for. And I think she's just pouring gasoline on a fire. What's going on with her, Mike?
I don't know. I think, was it last week that we were talking about Nikki Haley? And I said that I had been sober on Nikki Haley for quite some time, so that when we entertain conversations about potential candidacy for president of the United States, not something I get excited about in the least bit. I also said that that was not a suggestion that the likes of Lauren Boebert and or Marjorie Taylor Greene represent anything to the contrary in a positive way. And it seems as though the gods have shined upon my opinion and given us this tweet to analyze. I think I was in the shower this morning thinking about this stuff. I was rubbing the shampoo in my hair, stimulating the couple of brain cells that I have left after a life of, putting my head in a helmet and running at high speeds into other people. And I thought to myself, perhaps it's LTG now, lobotomy Taylor Greene, because I do think this is perhaps the dumbest thing. And she said a lot of dumb things. This is perhaps the dumbest thing I have ever seen her think or tweet. And I guess that's the same thing, because if you scroll down her timeline, much of what she's talking about is related to topical issues that you and I might take a gander at on a day-to-day basis, right? You've got here, the new fire in Bedford, Ohio at a metal manufacturing plant. She's addressing issues with Fox News, talking junk. She's talking about vaccine injury stuff, right? And then her pinned tweet is something to the effect of, today and every day is 1776, never give up our freedoms. And yet here we are thinking about aloud, hey, here's an ultimatum: impeach Biden or give us a national divorce. What kind of false choice is that, Norm?
Well, I don't know, and so, I mean, I look at Marjorie Taylor Greene, and, I think I mentioned last week that I've gotten to know a French journalist named Claire Minot, who reports on the United States. Mignal, I guess, is, from Le Point, a magazine in Paris, and she's covering the Biggs trial. And she is transfixed by this train wreck that we call the United States of America right now, and wonders why it is that we're so divided. And I said, Claire, you're a Parisian. You're here from France. Do it to Tocqueville. Go from one end of this country to another and study us and tell us what you see. You'll recall Tocqueville came to the United States, I think, in the 1830s. His declared objective was to study the emerging prisons system in the United States, to report on what he saw to France. And he was so mesmerized by the country that he ended up writing Democracy in America, a classic 2-volume account of who we are as a people. And I don't know if we know any longer who we are as a person. Go back to that pinned tweet of Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's talking in terms of the coin of the realm. 1776, when we declared our independence from Britain, never lose hold of our freedoms, and she'll make an appeal to, I presume, to the founders and the wisdom at the time of the founding. And these are common tropes, common phrases of speech that we all are encouraged to use when we say the Pledge of Allegiance, when we go through the rituals of the patriotic core that defines us. And they're good things. We are a people united, or at least we used to be, under some common conceptions of right and visions of what the future could hold. But, I think it was Thomas Hobbes who once said, words are wise men's counters, but in the hands of fools, they become something else. And Marjorie Taylor Greene is out there throwing Molotov cocktails at a cocktail party. And she's going to be the first one to complain when her dress catches fire. I'm on trial in the Proud Boys case right now. And a good deal of the evidence that the government has introduced against them thus far are incendiary comments that they made about taking the country back, and about stopping this deal, and this, that, and the other thing. And these words are now being used against them to try to persuade a jury that the words betokened a criminal intent and a desire to enter into a conspiracy to use force to oppose the authority of the United States government. The jury will decide whether the evidence amounts to that or not. I have strong views that the jury will hear in closing arguments. You all can infer them. I can't give you my closing argument in advance without breaking the rules of court. But what you've got is Marjorie Taylor Greene out here serving as a cheerleader for insurrectionists. And
that was going to be my question, Norm. Who is us? Who is the us that she's referring to when she says impeach Biden or give us a national divorce? I'll be the first to say that I think Biden is perhaps the biggest symbol of American decline in all of our history, right? And I've said, tongue in cheek, time and time again, 81 million of us voted for Biden. Us.
So 70 million didn't. And so, here's an open question. Is there really a culture war going on in the United States? I worry that I am susceptible to that rhetoric because I have deeply held views on right. I have deeply held good views on what makes a good society. And a lot of what I see on Twitter or on social media conflicts with those views. And it irritates me. And I see cancel culture. I see the new identitarians. I see a country that seems to be tearing at itself in the name of division rather than unity. But I'm not sure that I'm prepared to go to the battlefield. I'm not sure that I'm prepared to say, you take New York and I'll take Vermont and I'll see you in hell.
And neither is Marjorie. That's the point, Norm. I don't think it's so chintzy. It's such a cheap thing to say in today's day and age because we've lost all historical memory as to the sacrifices and bloodshed that earned us the prominence of the United States of America. How many people did we lose as a country in the Civil War? How many men gave their lives on the battlefield from the Union and from the South? And for her to just use whatever is going on geopolitically right now between us, Russia, China, etc., to lump all of these things together, criminals and cartels reign, and you're a fool. Who is you?
Well, I think Marjorie
is totally incoherent and cheap considering what she's referring to when she says national divorce. The last time that stuff ramped up, we lost millions of Americans. Millions.
So I think she's an illiterate nitwit. And so Marjorie Taylor Greene, I know you're watching, because what else would an American do on a Tuesday morning, even if we think it's Monday? I want you to pick up the Library of America volume, Debates on the Constitution. I'm holding it up for you now. Library of America, started back when I was a kid, and they produce a volume or so every month of classic works on American literature. And what in the two volumes that they have on the debates on the American Constitution are prints of essays that occurred as pamphlets or in newspaper articles at the time that the Constitutional Convention broke and Americans were being asked to ratify the Constitution. And it begins with an essay by Benjamin Franklin, a brief essay. The older I grow, he says, the more apt I am to doubt my own judgment and to pay more respect to the judgment of others. And I'm like, oh yeah, I underline that for a reason. But so in the essays, some people are saying this Constitution is a great idea. It may not be perfect. It's the best thing that we can do. And others are saying if we adopt it, we'll be giving up our liberties and going back to a situation even worse than the one from which we so narrowly escaped in our successful revolt against Britain. But what these essayists all had held in common was a reverence for debate and a desire to learn to live together under principles that all could accept and understand. I don't see Marjorie Taylor Greene picking up a pen and being part of a meaningful debate. So, I mean, she's an angry populist. I understand populism's appeal. I'm an angry populist as well. I don't want to lose a sense of significance in my own community, and I think that all Americans struggle for a sense of significance. But Marjorie Taylor Greene, take a chill pill. But while we're on the topic of rhetoric, last week what else surfaced on our radar was Ann Coulter, and Ann Coulter's poking at Nikki Haley. And the thing that caught my eye and really just pissed me off initially was Coulter saying, Nikki, go back to your own country. I mean, Nikki was born here. Her parents are immigrants from India. You encouraged me, Mike, to look a little more into the conflict. And I think that really what Coulter was doing was saying to Haley, when you, as governor of South Carolina, favored taking down the Confederate flag, basically you were saying to part of our history, you were unacceptable. And so why don't you go back to India and worship a cow in a food crisis? I mean, it's ugly rhetoric from Coulter, but I take her point as to Haley and Haley's decision to kind of side with the woke. But I don't know what your take is on Coulter. I watched some of an interview that Coulter gave with somebody over the weekend at your recommendation, Mike. I generally don't spend a lot of attention or pay a lot of attention to Ann. I think that she's sort of like a high octane version of Marjorie Taylor Greene. But these are incendiary politicians. In this case, they both happen to be women, which it's not Pick on Woman Day. That's just what the market bore this morning. And I wonder, I wonder what satisfaction they get from playing with this fire.
I don't know. So Ann Coulter has published 13 books now.
I don't know.
A number of New York Times bestsellers, and I don't know what that says about her or the New York Times bestsellers list. And I don't really care. I know that Ann Coulter was an advisor to Trump early on in his presidency, and she has been very hostile to Trump in the last several years. I know also that Ann is a firebrand, and you'll see, she did use the phrases preposterous creature and bimbo. But what I told you when we were originally planning to discuss this was that the context of her sit down with Tim Pool et al. Was helpful, right? So it gave some dimensionality to the story that I don't think anyone simply reading it might get. They actually played her comments on the interview when she sat down with Tim Pool, so you could hear everything in full. And what I heard, I recognized as something that, is largely a positive, if one is able to set aside their, predisposition to kind of cringe at some of the words used or the way that they were expressed. But her point was simply, Nikki Haley is a political animal. She will stab you in the back the moment that it serves her interest. She's been like that for years. for her to be someone who is here, a first-generation American, an American immigrant, who changed her name to fit some sort of societal expectation to preside over the removal of certain Confederate monuments and the flag over the South Carolina Capitol, is an abhorrent gesture to a very long and embattled American history. And Ann Coulter took the side of America with all of its warts, I would say. And to say that if you have an interest in removing history, in erasing history, perhaps start from whence you came and do it there first.
I don't know. I mean, Ann Coulter graduated University of Michigan Law School. I read this weekend in 1988, and if ever a good law degree went to waste, it was in her. I just remain disappointed in her. She strikes me as a sort of angry, effervescent fizz that lives off the rage of others, and I can't think of a positive contribution her works or her ideas.
I can't really disagree.
She just, and so she gets two darts from us today. Let's move on to something positive. Two very interesting cases are going to be argued in the United States Supreme Court. One today, Gonzalez v. Google, and one tomorrow, Twitter versus Tamna. Keep an eye on these cases because they could have enormous ramifications for freedom of speech in the digital era. In Gonzalez v. Lopez, the survivors of a decedent killed in Paris by ISIS terrorists in 2015, I don't recall if that was the Charlie Hebdo attack, has brought an action against Google. And the contention is fairly sophisticated. And that is that although Google was neutral, as it were, in terms of its purveying ideas, its algorithm, in other words, it's a search engine. The algorithms it used to finance itself fed people things that they thought people would be interested in. And so we've talked about this notion of surveillance capitalism before, made so famous by Shoshana Zuboff in her wonderful book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. The way it works is you use this account for free, you search for a Chinese cookbook, and the next thing you know, you're being directed to chopsticks and woks. And so the algorithm is keeping track of you and your data points, and then it's making some predictive analytic choices about what you might like to see next. Well, in the case of terrorists, the Gonzalez v. Google claim asserts the algorithms helped angry people find one another, and it helped ISIS select those who were vulnerable to being recruited. In the era of stochastic terrorism, the algorithm was far from neutral. The algorithm was a tool that helped ISIS succeed in recruiting people who went on to kill, and therefore Google ought to be responsible. In Gonzalez v. Google, the challenge will be whether Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act, which immunizes internet providers from liability for the information they give to others, whether that immunity applies here. And I say it's a close question, because the algorithms, as we're now learning with the ChatGPT questions, these algorithms that are embedded in our digital universe and are far from neutral, and they do effectively make choices and sculpt the world that we see and sculpt the choices that we can make. So it's quite possible that the Supreme Court will rule in a way that says Section 230 immunity is a good thing. It fosters the free flow of ideas across the internet, and those who merely republish the thoughts of others ought not to be liable. But yet, when a publisher takes steps to sculpt the reading experience or the information flow that its users can see, based on factors that the publisher adds to the neutral exchange of ideas, the publisher is basically responsible for the filters. And it could be that this decision says 230 immunity is fine, but the filters that one uses could yield a shedding of that immunity. A second case sounds similar, but it relies on a different statute. And this is the case of Twitter versus Tamna. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing the last name correctly. It's Taamneh. Again, another ISIS case. Excuse me. In 2017, the estate's decedent was killed in Istanbul by terrorists. And the lawsuit claims that Twitter, Google, and Facebook violated Section 233 of the Anti-Terrorism Act by effectively offering assistance to terrorists. That is, their forum was a platform that terrorists could use to communicate with one another and therefore accomplish their deadly aims. This suit strikes me as far less likely to succeed than Gonzalez v. Google, and it wouldn't surprise me at all. And keep track of this, because we'll talk about this in June when these decisions get announced to see whether I'm right. It wouldn't surprise me to see a victory for Gonzalez against Google, but a loss against Twitter and others in the Tamna case. And the reason is I don't think that Tamna does a good enough job saying that a neutral forum should be penalized when folks with antisocial aims go to that neutral forum. So, for example, two guys go to the New York, Times Square and scream, "Let's burn the world down," and one of them burns it down or attempts to burn it down. Is the city responsible because the guys met on Times Square? That's Twitter v. Tamna, at least in my view, and I think the answer is no. In a truly neutral marketplace, ideas will be expressed, and sometimes there'll be untoward consequences. And to hold the owner of the forum responsible probably strains the notion of proximate cause to the breaking point and to the detriment of free speech. Whereas in Gonzalez v. Google, the algorithm matters, and I don't know the underlying record well enough to know how much information was revealed in discovery, assuming they got to discovery and it wasn't decided on a motion to dismiss in Gonzalez v. Google, because it's the content of that algorithm that matters. And I remind everybody once again, of the whole Chat GPT drama. We were told a month or so ago that there was this marvelous new artificial intelligence device that potentially was a game changer for those of us who work with words. You could ask it a question, and it would produce an essay that was, virtually indistinguishable from that most people would produce. And then playful wits began to pose questions to ChatGPT in a way to test the boundaries, whether it was really neutrally assembling data, and come to find out that ChatGPT is really a liberal Democrat, or a woke liberal Democrat. And what it does ultimately is reflect the choices of those who design the algorithm. And so that will provide a useful way of evaluating, I think, for the court in Gonzalez v. Google, the extent to which Google should be responsible for the choices its algorithm made. I don't know how you see it, Mike. I don't know if I'm.
Yeah, in the latter case, it strikes me that we are talking more and more and more about Twitter's relationship with domestic intelligence agencies here in the United States. And that is not an insignificant fact in consideration of what's being alleged here in the Twitter, and I'm going to butcher the last name, so I'll avoid it, but in the Twitter suit. And what I guess you said that this will likely cut against the First Amendment. Am I?
Yeah, I think looking, as framed like the aiding and abetting liability. I mean,
yes.
If I have a forum and I say you're free to speak, that doesn't really reflect a criminal mens rea, a criminal state of mind. I'm not aiding and abetting a person in their criminal purpose. I'm simply making a public forum available to them. If they choose to use that forum for a criminal end, am I legally responsible for the choices they made? And that's why I say that holding Twitter responsible in the Tamna case or in the Twitter case will strain the concept of proximate cause to the breaking point.
Well, and I'm thinking of a step or two further, Norm, about what is perhaps the truth as it relates to the relationship between Twitter and domestic intelligence agencies, namely the FBI, the NSA, where if the Supreme Court were to find that Twitter is liable in this context, well then I I don't know what the future of big social media would be in America, but if they find that Twitter is not liable, what the facts that we now know based on the Twitter files means for purposes of 18 USC 2333 D2, right? In other words, is it a good thing from the court's vantage, right? Is it a redeeming thing from the court's vantage under this sort of fact pattern that perhaps Twitter may have been working with one of the country's intelligence agencies on the ground to no avail, right? In other words, there's some sort of affirmative defense fact pattern layered within this. That's what concerns me more than anything, and I'll dig in a little more to figure it out. But that to me is what strikes me as correct about what you were saying with respect to the First Amendment being the you know the lone person at the party at the end of this.
Well, yeah, and I haven't, and only now in listening to and beginning to think about the ramifications of this to the extent that Twitter cooperates with federal law enforcement agencies. I mean, the surveillance state cuts a number of different ways. If the FBI or law enforcement is embedded within Twitter, or embedded within a dissent organization, and the dissent organization violates the law, is Twitter then responsible, and the federal government then responsible for not preventing the harm? I mean, the surveillance state cuts a number of different ways. So I don't know the answer to that question. I don't even know a whole lot more about these two cases than what I've discussed. I want to thank Janice Dabrowski, a longtime listener,
She's in the chat this morning. Hey, Janice.
Bringing the cases to our attention. Keep up the good work. I would have missed them otherwise. In Gonzalez v. Google, it's the algorithm that has me fascinated, in large part because of the Chat GPT issue. I mean, we want to think that our data streams are neutral, but they're highly curated. And returning to where we opened this morning, is there really a cultural war going on in the United States, or is social media ginning up the extreme, and in the name of clickbait giving prominence to people like Marjorie Taylor Greene when they start to articulate inflammatory nonsense, or even to Ann Coulter, who, whatever point she may have had about Nikki Haley as an opportunist, was herself a clickbaiting opportunist, knowing how to press the rage button. And does this really serve the purposes of the common good? I think there's a powerful argument that it does not. I'm not sure that the Supreme Court's decisions are going to help us decide that one way or another. But I do worry about freedom of expression.
Well, a couple things here in the chat. Lawyer Will says, one of my friends tried using Chat GPT for legal research, and it fabricated quotes from cases and gave incorrect citations, which is wild.
Is that really true? Wow.
That's what he's saying. He also opines that Section 2...
Well, in the case of bullshit versus cat urine, Chief Justice Michael Boyer of the United States Supreme Court once said the difference is indistinguishable.
What a world. What a world. And he also says that Section 230 will be moderated eventually, that Congress enacted that in the 90s when there was a concern about squelching a fledgling web industry. And that's correct.
I think that's right.
And I think, our good friend Ron Coleman would have a few more items to add to that as well. Pete Atkinson, Pete says, how did your talk go, Mike? It went extraordinarily well. I was on a panel late last week at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro for the Bryan School of Business and Economics. That talk is actually on YouTube now with the Bryan Break Room. You can search for it. And I was, on a panel alongside two other industry members. One is the president of the Distillers Association in North Carolina and a division manager for a large distributor here for distilled spirits and wine, as well as the president of Greensboro's ABC board. I was surprised, Norm. The dean of the business school actually attended that panel. So I had a great time applying pressure to a couple of guys that make their hay keeping things the same and really advocating for the private sector. I think there were a few people from our crew here that actually joined and watched.
Cool. Well, I've yet to see it, but I will. But at first, I got to get something to drink while I watch it. Hey, what's up with Project Veritas and James O'Keefe? He left, and the question is, does Veritas survive?
Well, I don't know. So he put out a 45-minute video on YouTube, and I'll bring that up for our viewers. But he really unpacked all the detail, because he's been quiet up until this point, right? Just to do a quick rewind, Project Veritas put out a statement that he had been put on leave, that they were looking into blah blah blah. Information came out eventually. Board meeting minutes from the board of directors meeting that we're discussing here were leaked. It was shown that he was being removed as CEO without pay. He was being stripped of his seat on the board of directors for Project Veritas. And what's happening now, Norm, is they've started to allege that there was some sort of financial misappropriation or financial malfeasance on James's part. In this video, which is up on Tim Cass's website, he actually goes through and debunks each and every one of the claims being made. And again, I think that, I don't know if you knew this, James generated, and there's a table down here. Look at the annual revenue for Project Veritas with James at the helm over the last 10 or so years. 2020, they posted annual revenue of $22 million, up $10 million from 2019. And to give you some context, he just broke the biggest story just several weeks ago about Pfizer. 50 million plays on YouTube of that video, which is 5 times more than any other Project Veritas video has ever gotten. And all of a sudden there's this inquiry into his use of Ubers, or a return of money that from a venue that he booked for a Christmas party, this, that, and the third. I mean, very, very strange where this is coming from.
Well, one wonders whether Project Veritas will survive, and we look forward to Mr. O'Keefe's emergence elsewhere. He brought the golden goose into the barn. If he wants an egg or two out of it, I'm not going to complain.
Well, I don't even know that I think that's not even being fair to him. But this video is 45 minutes. I do encourage anybody to go to timcast.com, or you can just search James O'Keefe, Tim Pool, and then filter it for most recent within the last day, and this article will come up. If you have time for the 45 minutes, he reads his letter to the board out loud in an office.
Well, I will try to find time to do that today, but now I must leave. Objection, objection, objection. Getting myself warmed up for the day 35. Are we on YouTube now, Mike?
We are on YouTube. So as of this morning, even this broadcast included is on YouTube at Law and Legitimacy. You can find that in the description for this video, or on Twitter probably. I'll have to get a little more organized on that. But yeah, so we'll be streaming simultaneously here and YouTube every morning. I know we've had some people that have expressed reluctance or some friction using the Rumble app, which I disbelieve, but I'll take them at their word. We're on YouTube now. If we get banned, don't be surprised, but we're there.
And we have an open invitation to Marjorie Taylor Greene. Come run your mouth here. I want to hear about why you think this is 1776 all over again. And when you come for your interview, Representative Greene, be prepared to tell us about the last book you read cover to cover. TV Guide doesn't count.
All right, Norm, enjoy day 35 of the United States versus Joseph Biggs et al. We'll get an update from you tomorrow morning.
Sounds good. Talk to you then.
All right, bye, Norm.